We didn't choose to be under this system. First of all, there's a lot of evidence that is coming up recently that's showing that we was already here, that we are the fucking Indians.
In the heart of the Brazilian wilderness lies a prehistoric rock shelter, decorated with thousands of strange paintings. South American archaeologists are finding unusual human remains. The skulls aren't European, but they aren't American Indian either. The skulls aren't European, but they aren't American Indian either. They belong to none of the prehistoric races known to have set foot in the New World. These skulls are as old as the Ice Age. So who were these first people to discover the Americas? And what became of them? Did they all disappear? Or did some of them survive? Archaeologists there have recently unearthed human remains. Prehistoric skulls were found buried in layers of soil 9,000 to 12,000 years old. They are the oldest skulls in the Americas. And this is the oldest of them all. The skull of a young woman nicknamed Luthia by scientists. Can she tell us who the first Americans were? Walter Neves is a physical anthropologist at Sao Paulo University in Brazil. He's been using a standard and reliable archaeological measure, the shape of the skull, to find out what race she belonged to.
91.
He fully expected Luthia to be a Mongoloid, an ancestor of the American Indians.
91.
But then he fed the measurements into the computer.
When we started running the computer and seeing the results, it was amazing because we realized that the statistics, the quantitative analysis we were doing was not showing just people to be Mongoloid. In fact, the analysis was showing these people was anything except Mongoloid.
So who was Luthia? And where did she come from? To find out, the skull was taken to a hospital in Rio de Janeiro to begin the process of reconstructing her face. The first stage was to make a three-dimensional CAT scan of Luthia's skull in order to build a replica. The cast was then given to Richard Neve of the University of Manchester in England, one of the world's leading forensic artists, to recreate her features.
to me is a Negro face. That to me is a Negro face. That to me is a Negro face. Has all the features that you associate with a Negroid face. The proportions of the face, it doesn't say anything about it being a Mongoloid.
Her reconstruction is confirmed by measurements Walter Nevis has taken of all his skulls.
The first reaction was not to believe in it. But as the results, repeated so many times, and the result is exactly the same thing. They are very similar to nowadays Aborigines and Africans, and no similarity at all with Mongoloids in Asia or with American Indians. They are very similar to nowadays Aborigines and Africans, and no similarity at all with Mongoloids in Asia or with American Indians.
Aborigines, which means what? Black folks. But you never find a white Aborigine. Aborigines are called natives, or they're always dark-skinned people. You and I are Aborigines, but you don't like to be called an Aborigine.
A lot of people don't know the original design for the Statue of Liberty was a black female. As a matter of fact, in a museum in New York, you can see the original design of the Statue of Liberty, which is a black woman. When the French artist created the Statue of Liberty, it was supposed to represent the end of slavery. On the original model, there were chains on the hands and feet, as we know. when the statue got to America, they wanted to erase any references to slavery from the statue, but the artists really fought to keep the chains on there because this is your art. You don't want people tampering with your art. And if you look, the chain is still on the foot of the Statue of Liberty to this day.
Well, the story was that it was a gift of the French to the slaves, and that the original statue had the picture of a black woman, the original model for it, and it had a distinctly African face. But it was Europeanized because the people of the United States did not want to have a black face sitting up there in their harbor, so they carved it out in France. They had to go back to the drawing board and remodel the face after the what they call the patron saint of Manifest Destiny. So the patron saint of Manifest Destiny, that's her face on the what they call the Statue of Liberty, which was transposed from the African face. In fact, you see the patron saint of Manifest Destiny in the symbol for Columbia Pictures at the beginning of the movies. That's the patron saint of Manifest Destiny. Post-slavery Africans were consolidated. They were more together than ever. Segregation gave them the necessity, or created the necessity for them to maintain a type of cohesion with each other, no matter if it was infighting. They still had their self-interest and the collective interest. So we didn't know who the enemy was back there. Today, after integration, we don't know who the enemy is anymore.
The Statue of Liberty has been standing in the New York harbor for over 129 years. She displays many symbols of freedom, including her torch and her tablet. But there is one symbol in particular that is not visible to most people, and that is the chains and shackles at her feet. In 1865, at the end of the Civil War, America ushered in a new chapter of freedom with the passing of the 13th Amendment. This brought about the ending of slavery. During this same time period, France was in its second empire under the rule of Emperor Napoleon III. French political thinker and a member of the anti-slavery movement, Edouard de la Boulaye, is inspired by the recent developments in America. He wants to motivate the French people to take action towards the pro-democracy movement in France. La Boulaye joined forces with sculptor Frédéric Bartholdi to create a statue that represents freedom on a monumental scale. It would also combine the ideas of freedom and democracy shared by America and France. Bartholdi experimented with several models and designs before settling on the statue that we see today. In one of his earlier designs, instead of her tablet, the statue held chains in her left hand. Ultimately, the chains were moved to her feet, invisible to viewers from the ground. Today, many people have interpreted the chains and shackles at the statue's feet as a symbol of breaking free from slavery, tyranny, and oppression.
Hi, this is Iglesias from the Mexica movement, and today I want to talk about being mixed blood. Okay, there seems to be this attitude that we have in our communities, and when I'm saying our communities, I'm talking about Mexican, Central American, South American, our people from the Western Hemisphere, because of the lack of information and the lack of knowledge of who we are as a people. We tend to completely disconnect ourselves from identifying as an indigenous person if we have light skin, and I blame that on Eurocentric education and the media. And we have to keep in mind, first of all, before the invasion of our lands, before 1492, our part of the world, which is the Western Hemisphere, was the most diverse part of the planet, right? We had all different shades of brown, all shapes and sizes. We were tall, we were short, we were dark, we were light brown, dark brown. So first we have to get that into our mind, right? We have to understand that. Now, through the process of massive rape, cultural castration, and genocide, which is what started happening to us in 1492, over the process of centuries, right? Now we are 5 centuries from the point of the occupation. There was massive rape. We do not like to talk about it. It's uncomfortable. We like to believe that we just married Europeans happily. We had beautiful weddings and we popped out mixed babies, and that's the way we came to be. Well, the reality is it's far from what really took place. Okay, you have to read what Europeans wrote themselves on how they were killing us. Okay, they didn't, first of all, they didn't even see us as human. Okay, much like they didn't see anybody else that was not white as human. So they went around raping women worldwide. And in our particular case here, it was part of the culture of how they kept us in control. Now, the massive rape that took place is not talked about. It's glamorized in Mexico and Central America because obviously Mexico and Central America are not being covered by Mexican Central Americans. The criollos, which are the descendants of the original Spaniards that still govern our countries, are still in control, and the culture and the social makeup of those countries, those occupied countries, want to reinforce white supremacy and the love of Europeans. So, you know, us today, and I come across this a lot, right? Our people, they see what we're talking about and they're saying, well, I'm not full blood, you know, I can't be indigenous. Or our people, you know, come to me and say, well, look at you, you know, you're not indigenous, you're not native. And because I don't fit into their stereotypical view of what is an indigenous person, or they themselves don't fit into that stereotypical view of what is an indigenous person, automatically they completely disconnect to that identity, right? And it could be for a lot of reasons. It could be for self-hate. It could be for lack of pride, thinking that, you know what, how can I identify? I'm not even, you know, full blood. Well, let me tell you that we as an indigenous people are full blood and mixed blood indigenous people. The last 5 centuries will not completely erase who we are and then create us new on the planet, right? We as an indigenous people belong to an ancient connection, an ancient presence on this land that we are on today. So the fact that you are not full blood, those of us that are not full blood, does not take away your right to your culture and to your identity. Do not let Europeans, self-hating Mexicans, Central Americans, indigenous people tell you something else, okay? Now, that's a big crippling thing, mentally crippling realization, because we are so conditioned as a people to justify, right? I think it has to do with the fact that we're on our own continent, and if, you know, the majority of the people of the Western Hemisphere start reclaiming who they are, then there's going to be an inevitable takeover. They already think we're taking over, right? And Yeah, you know, in demographics and populations we are, but we are not growing in our mind. We are not growing in our knowledge. We are not growing in our connection to our heritage. So I want to say that being a mixed blood and full blood indigenous person completely unites you to your heritage. Okay, you have to keep in mind that we've been here, we've been developing our culture, we've been developing our languages, we've been developing our own way of life for thousands of years. And recently they've even dated it to 50,000 years ago, right? So all of those years, right? All of those years that we were an indigenous people, an indigenous free people, and I'm talking about Mexicans, Central Americans, South Americans, Native Americans, all of us on the Western Hemisphere. All of a sudden, in 1492, everything that we were, that we are supposed to just completely ignore, completely brush under the rug and say, oh, we were nothing. You know, who we are today represents what happened to us, the genocide that we have been subject to, but that does not redefine who we are. It adds to who we are. It adds a very specific experience, a very traumatic genocidal experience, but it does not rob us of who we are. Okay, so we have to be very honest with ourselves, and we have to be very honest upon researching our history to realize that what our ancestors went through was rape. Okay, our ancestors were raped. It doesn't feel good to say that. It's very uncomfortable to say that, but it's the truth. There's no nice way to say it. Disney could make 10 Pocahontas movies if they want. You know, all this kid version of history, but you cannot sanitize what happened to us. Okay, the fact that 95% of our population was wiped out, in some areas 100%, mass rape that took place, we have to understand what brought us here today to look like we look. Okay, so that's one thing that I want to emphasize. I get it all the time. You look at you, you're not native, you're not indigenous. Well, says who? I mean, really, do you want me to go to Europe and Russia and all these Nordic European countries and be like, hey guys, I'm back home, welcome back? You think they're gonna look at me like, oh yeah, come on down, you know, you're white, you fit the culture? No, I'm an indigenous person. Just like me, many of us out there are confused because we feel that if we don't fit this specific image of an indigenous person, that we're not. Let's not do that to each other. Let's not do that to ourselves. Let's understand that we have a wide variety of brown colors in our community. And let's not let colonialism and that rape experience define who we are. Those of us that are mixed blood are indigenous people. We're full blood, we're indigenous people to this continent. Do not let European colonialism define who you are, and let's not let them delete anything of who we were. Okay, we are a continuation of who we were thousands of years ago, but we are up against the challenge of white supremacy and Eurocentric ideologies that govern our lands, govern our culture, our politics, and our resources. Citlali with the Mexica movement, I just wanted to share that with you because I've been getting bombarded with that. We are an indigenous people. The term that we like to introduce is Nicantlaca. We belong here. We are mixed blood and full blood indigenous people. Nowhere to go. This is where we are. This is where we will be. And we will understand that identity because we are starting the decolonizing process. Thank you for watching. I will be posting more videos soon. Please share, talk about this, you know, send me questions, concerns, you know, whatever thoughts you want to share with me. Check out our videos on our website on www.mexica-movement.org. Thank you very much for watching. Citlali from the Mexica Movement.
you've seen that we're the only show that does DNA testing. I mean,
It's very exciting.
other than Maury Povich, the only nighttime.
And that's like baby daddy stuff.
That's baby daddy. No, this
Yeah.
is, we already know baby daddy. And so a couple of weeks ago, Larry David found out that he was 37% Native American. Right? Did you see that?
I did see that.
Okay, now you submitted a swab of your cheeks, and so did your dad, to make sure that it was
Yeah,
accurate.
because they say that having a male
Yes.
swab is better, right?
So we sent both the samples to the DNA Diagnostic Center in Cincinnati. The test results can be broken down into 4 ancestral groups. One is European, which is white.
Right.
Oh my God. One is East Asian, which is Asian, or as Latinos say, chinito. One is Sub-Saharan African, which is black, and one is Native American. Okay? All right,
Fully.
this is the moment we've all been waiting for.
But we'll see.
I have the results right here. Listen, Oprah thought she was more Native American, and she turned out not to be. So what do you think that you are?
Probably more Native American.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's find out. Robin? Here we go. Jessica Alba, you are 0% East Asian.
So now, oh,
You are 0% Sub-Saharan African. You are 13% Indigenous American. And you are 87% European.
really? Wow.
So Farrah, there you go.
Wow, that's crazy.
Jessica Alba, you are whiter than Larry David.
But does Spain count? Because Alba comes from Spain. Like our last name.
We will give you the results, all the details,
okay.
all the paperwork.
But I mean, is Spain? Oh my God! Or is Spain?
No, I don't think Spain's considered. Oh my God!
All right.
Maybe your dad was traveling through the Southwest and saw Albuquerque and thought Alba. I'll give you all the results.
I can't believe this. This is crazy, by the way.
You are more Buffy the Vampire Slayer than you are Dark Angel.
Hey!
No, come on. You'll always be the Dark Angel to me. You know that.
Yes.
Are Hispanic people white? Well, that depends on who you're talking to. There's a very confusing statistic about the percentage of white people in America thanks to a clause in the US Census that refers to white non-Hispanic. Now, if you're white with European ancestry, Asian with Asian ancestry, or black with African ancestry, this may not be something you've ever even thought about. Let's look at the 2010 census. If you check the box that simply says white, this registers you as white non-Hispanic, which makes up 62% of the population. But together, white Hispanics and Latinos are 77% of the population. Now, if that seems like a quick way to boost the number of white people living in this country, that's because it kind of is. And if that also seems really confusing, that's because it is. So if you ever hear anyone say, "This is America and 77% of it is white," whether they know it or not, they are in fact including a very large number of people who identify as Hispanic or Latino. If you look at the 2010 census application again, the difficulty is that Hispanic is not considered a race. The census asks you to choose your Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin, then choose your race between the 6 categories offered. Not only is this a hell of a shock when you consider that over 55 million US citizens are Hispanic, but I guess the some other race category is supposed to be a passive-aggressive catch-all for their beautifully diverse culture? And even that option doesn't really work. According to the US Census Bureau, most people who mark some other race are often counted as white. So if Hispanic isn't a race, then what is it? Well, before we get to that, we actually have to settle another important thing. What's the difference between Hispanic and Latino? So I'm gonna enlist some help from my friend, Kat Lasso.
Thanks for having me, Francesca. So it may get a little confusing if this is your first time hearing this, so I'll try to keep it as simple as I can. Hispanic refers to people of Spanish-speaking origin. It means you have a family history in a Spanish-speaking country. This means you have origins in these countries, including Spain. But notice how Brazil isn't included in the map? Well, that's because they don't primarily speak Spanish. They speak Portuguese. Which brings us to Latino, or Latinx if you want to be gender inclusive, which you should be. Latinx refers to having origins in Latin America, which is basically the countries in North and South America that are geographically south of the United States, including most of the Caribbean. And unlike Hispanic, Latinx excludes much of Latin America's colonizer, Spain. So, one more time, Hispanic refers to language and Latinx focuses on geographic location. But whichever term you use, neither of them actually refer to racial identity. Just like America, Latin America has a long and complex history that intersects between native people, European colonization, African slavery, and global immigration patterns. Which is why there are white Latinos, native Latinos, black Latinos, Asian Latinos, and every kind of mixture that you can think of. Does that help?
Yeah, that does help. But I think part of the problem we're dealing with here is the broader confusion between ethnicity and race. As we've covered, race is not biologically real. It's basically an ever-shifting categorization that sometimes includes ethnicity and sometimes doesn't. But when it comes to ethnicity, there are legitimate differences between groups of people that aren't based on external characteristics. And yes, ethnicity can get fuzzy, but there are cultural practices you can associate with it, like language, cultural values, and traditions. Which is why if an Argentinian couple adopts a baby from China, that baby will most likely grow up speaking Spanish and rooting for Lionel Messi. The simple answer? Race doesn't exist, but ethnicity does.
Exactly. The reason this gets so confusing when we're talking about Latinx in America is that there's a broad ethnic Latinx identity that has a complex history with lots of different racial groups living together. Latinx isn't a race, but we're definitely racialized as a people. Which is confusing, and I'm the one who said it. The US and Latin American media has done a great job at constructing an image of what Latinx look like. And that image is rarely black or fully indigenous, for example. We, like the rest of the world, have internalized these messages of white supremacy through the media and through our education. So it's no wonder that when Latinx here in the US are confronted with deciding their race based on the census in a predominantly black and white binary society, many of us default to white. I personally identify as a mixed race Latina with indigenous ancestry, but that's just me. There are a multitude of ways that Latinx choose to identify racially, but it's up to us to unlearn much of what we've been taught about race and demand better and more accurate forms of representation.
Damn, there has to be a better way to talk about this. Well, there is a better way. The census is planning to make changes in 2020 in one huge way. They're going to stop using the word race altogether. Hispanic, Latino, and Spanish origin will be a category like everything else, with no qualifiers. That means people will now check the categories that best describe them. This will not only give us a better idea of how many people identify as Hispanic or Latino, but could also give us a better idea of multiracial and multi-ethnic numbers. So to return to the original question, are Hispanic or Latino people white? Well, some are and some aren't. But to quote the 2013 Census Bureau report, race and ethnicity are not quantifiable values. Rather, identity is a complex mix of one's family and social environment, historical or socio-political constructs, personal experience, context, and many other immeasurable factors. Surprisingly woke coming from the census. Special thanks to my friend Kat Lasso. Tell us where we can find you online.
You can check out my work at Me Too or my personal channel, The Cat's Meow.
We'll put links in the description box. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time right here on Decoded.
En la pregunta de raza, ¿qué raza van a marcar? En la pregunta de raza hay blanco, negro, nativo americano o asiático. ¿Qué raza se consideran ustedes? Hispano. Hispano es herencia cultural, pero no es raza. ¿Alguna vez se ha puesto a pensar qué raza es usted? Ay, no sé, ¿es usted blanco, es usted negro, es usted nativo americano o es usted asiático?
Tengo mi color, ¿qué color seré? Voy a ser moreno.
¿Alguna vez podría pensar en marcar nativo americano? Sí. Now, in the question of race, which race do you mark? Black, white, Native American, or Asian?
I think white.
White? Yeah. You consider yourself white? Not really.
Not really.
But do you know your race, your history, your ancestors? Never thought about it?
No.
What's your country originally from?
Mexico.
Mexico. En la pregunta de raza, ahí en pregunta dice si usted es blanco, negro, nativo americano o asiático. ¿Cuál marcó usted?
No, la de ¿cómo se llama? La de hispano.
Usted marcó hispano.
Sí, sí.
Ok, pero hispano no es una raza, sino una herencia cultural. Pero hay otra pregunta que dice ¿cuál es su raza? ¿Usted marcó esa pregunta?
No, o sea que no lo he llenado, o sea, no lo he llenado.
Okay. ¿Usted personalmente qué raza se considera usted? ¿Y usted? ¿Cuál es su herencia racial?
Pues ahí no estamos en ninguna, ¿sí? No, es que de esas no estamos en ninguna. No, pues la raza la hispana, latina, no sé.
No, o sea, ¿nunca usted se ha puesto a pensar cuál es su verdadera raza?
No.
Porque hispano o latino básicamente es europeo.
Sí.
Pero la mayoría, como usted ve aquí, la gente, somos mezclas.
Mezclas.
Okay. You live in the U.S., you're supposed to get the census form. You fill it up. What race do you mark? Black African American. What race would you mark? And now, when you see here, most of the people are from Latin America, right? What race do you think they are? Are they white, black, Native American, or Asian? Asian? What about you?
Same.
Really? We look Asian?
No, not. Oh, you mean like everybody together?
Yeah, most people here that you see that speak Spanish.
Now, what race was you saying?
Yeah. Are we white? Are we black? Are we Asian or Native American? Because Hispanic or Latino is not a race. It's a cultural heritage.
So what's the culture? So what is it? Native American, right? Native American.
Do we look Native American to you? Of course we are.
Yeah.
But I was asking most of them, and they consider themselves white. What do you think of that?
It's just a skin color for real.
Do we look white to you?
Nah, I consider y'all Native Americans more than white.
Exactly. What race do you mark on the question of race? ¿Qué raza marcó?
I'm confused a little bit.
Está confundido.
Yeah.
Okay. Entre las razas blanco, negro, nativo y asiático, ¿cuál se considera usted?
Blanco, negro. Esa es la confusión, que no sé. Yo quería encontrar que era hispano, latino.
Claro. ¿Y usted se considera hispano? ¿Usted cree que sus ancestros son todos de España?
Yo pienso que sí.
¿Sí? ¿De qué país originariamente es usted? De México. En la cuestión de raza, ¿qué raza marcó?
Blanca, raza blanca.
Blanca.
Sí, blanca.
¿De qué país es usted?
Uruguay.
Uruguay. Ahora, cuando usted ve el resto de la mayoría de la población en este barrio, yo he estado preguntando y muchos de ellos dicen que son blancos. ¿Usted cree que esa es la verdadera raza de la mayoría de la gente por acá?
Yo creo que sí.
¿Sí?
Porque el moreno es moreno y nosotros los latinos somos raza blanca.
Okay.
Yo digo la raza digamos de color, la raza.
Ahora, ¿alguna vez se ha puesto a pensar que quizás...
Creo en mi pensamiento.
Claro. ¿Alguna vez se ha puesto a pensar si muchas de las personas son de raza nativo-americana?
Sí, es que hay también.
Puede ser.
En mi país hay también.
Exactamente.
En su país también hay.
Exacto. Bueno, muchas gracias.
No,
okay. Personally, if you will fill this form in the question of race, what race will you identify with? Are you white, black, Native American, Asian?
Hispanic.
Yeah, but Hispanic is not a race. It's a cultural heritage. But in race, which race do you identify yourself with? You don't know your race? Do you know your race? So basically, are you black, white, Native American, or Asian?
I don't know.
You never thought about it?
No.
Is that right? Where are you from, if I may ask?
Mexico.
Mexico. Where about you? Mexico. Do you know there is a census going on right now?
Yeah.
Did you get a form?
Yeah.
Did you send it back already?
Yeah.
And the question of race, what race do you mark?
Race?
Race, yeah. What race do you write in? Do you write white, black, Native American, or Asian?
Black.
Black. And when you come here and you see most of the people who speak Spanish, what race do you think they are?
Hispanic.
But Hispanic is not a race, it's a cultural heritage.
Oh, what race do I think they are?
Yeah.
Indians?
In American Indians.
American Indians.
Yeah, but I asked most of them, and most of them say they are white. What do you think of that?
No, I don't think they're considered Caucasoid.
Okay.
But I don't think they're white.
Exactly.
They're Indians.
Yeah, but a lot of them don't know this.
I know they don't know this.
And when you think the question of being Hispanic or Latino has to do with that?
No, you're right. Hispanic and Latino is a culture, because you could be black and be Hispanic also. So yeah.
Okay, you send the form back.
You probably do it. Oh, I didn't do the form.
Oh, you haven't done it? Are you gonna do it?
Yes, I'm gonna do it, but I didn't do it yet.
Okay, well, thank you guys. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
¿Qué raza piensas marcar? Porque hay básicamente 4 razas, ¿no? Blanco, negro, nativo o indígena y asiático. ¿Cuál raza piensas tú marcar?
Pues yo creo que eso ya es de cada quien, ¿no? Eso yo pues...
Personalmente, tú...
Personalmente, pues... que es uno, ¿no?
¿Cuál es tu raza? ¿Cuál consideras que es tu raza?
Yo latino.
Pero latino no es raza, solamente hay blanco, negro, nativo o asiático.
Yo creo que blanco, ¿no?
Ok. Bueno, ¿te puedo preguntar qué país eres?
México.
Ok, muchas gracias.
Órale.
Ok. Ahora, cuando dice la cuestión de raza, ¿qué raza piensas tú marcar? ¿Cuál es tu raza? ¿Hispano? ¿Alguna vez han pensado marcar a American Indian, indígena americano? ¿Todos tus ancestros son de España? O sea, si hispano es porque tienes ancestros de España. Sí, o ¿cuál crees que es la verdadera raza que te identifica?
Mestizo.
Mestizo.
Sí, no, si somos nosotros.
¿Qué es mestizo?
Pues,
Una mezcla.
pues sí, pues eso, una mezcla.
¿Mezcla de qué, por ejemplo?
Vamos de un país con un país.
En tu caso personal, ¿de qué mezcla tú tienes? ¿De español solamente o de otras razas? ¿Solamente español?
Sí, solamente.
Ok. Bueno, ¿de qué país son, si les puedo preguntar? Guatemala. En la pregunta de raza, ¿qué raza han marcado? Ok, ¿les puedo preguntar de qué país son? México. Ok, muchas gracias.
I think white.
White? You consider yourself white? Not really.
Not really.
But do you know your race, your history, your ancestors? Never thought about it?
No.
While Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill rarely see eye to eye, they did agree on one thing recently. Derogatory terms must be removed from federal law. Up until Friday, 2 acts in a section of the U.S. Code that deals with public health and welfare used the terms Oriental and Negro. They were written in the 1970s. Both the House and Senate unanimously passed a bill that replaces those terms with Asian American and African American.
President Barack Obama signed the bill into law Friday. The law also replaces the terms American Indian, Eskimo, Aleut, and Spanish-speaking individual of Spanish descent with Native American, Alaska Native, and Hispanic, and adds Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander.
You see, it's just like Al-Qaeda today. Or is it ISIS? Or is it ISIL? Or is it IS? I mean, right? Let's just change the name as much as possible to throw you all off so you really don't know what's going on. Let's keep switching the identity to hide the people. Why don't we just keep renaming you? Are you Negro? Oh, no, you're not Negro. No, you're colored. No, you're not colored. You're African American. And this is what they name you. The slavers name you this. Because I know a white guy who grew up in South Africa. And he now lives in America. He is an African American, and more African American than most. Do you see how African American is a misnomer? It's a misnomer. Don't check that box. It's a title given to blacks by democratic slavers. Okay? Let's be real. They want you to check the box just like they want the Anglo-Saxon to check the Caucasian box. It's not true.
1976. Uh-oh. And here's the year-by-year timeline of America's major wars. Year-by-year timeline of America's major wars, 1776 to 2011. And we're still in war today. 1776, American Revolutionary War. Chickamauga Wars, Second Cherokee War, Pennamite Yankee War. They don't figure this out yet. Don't worry about it. We're going to get there. American Revolutionary War.
Then we just read the annals of the Cockchaquels, the Chickamauga. Come on, man. Come on, Anasazis. Every time you see this is all Negro, except you're not Negro, right? They're giving you titles, man. I mean, you never heard this stuff before. This might be closer to what you actually might be. You're getting warmer. Get off the Negro. Check that box, American Indian. Check something, but don't check black, don't check African American. You just giving it all up. Then you're saying you're not the people that they were fighting, when in reality you are. Let go.
War, Chickamauga War, Second Cherokee War, Pennamite Yankee War, 78 American Revolutionary War, 79 American Revolutionary War, 80 American Revolutionary War,
Negro.
81 American Revolutionary War,
Negro.
82 American Revolutionary War.
Negro.
Listen, they've been at war with your ass the whole time. I want you to understand this. Look at what the fuck I'm showing you, people. Please focus. Focus. Since 1776, they have been at war with you, right? The war never ended. It never ended. They got clever. And started changing names.
recognized as who they are, but instead are forced to accept methods of paper genocide, misclassification, and forced U.S. citizenship assimilated as African American, and other false identities.
Location, location, location.
In 2015, when we attended our first session, we were not allowed to make a statement. So this year we brought NAACP members from 12 different historical tribes from Northeast America, as well as tribal leaders from Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic to help in making a visual statement. It is unfortunate that we must attend this forum to visually show and say to the world, we, the dark Aborigine of America, are still here. I am Hemok Sheila, Director General for the National Association for the Advancement of Indigenous People, located in Northeast Indian Country, America. NAACP is the United Nations registered IPO. It was established by recognized and unrecognized Aborigine and Native Americans, along with signatories foreign and domestic. I'm thankful for this opportunity, Honorable Chair. On the topic of Indigenous peoples' agenda addressing the first 6 steps, as I'm calling them, Indigenous peoples must first be recognized by colonizing societies as members of the human family. And the process of recognition must come from the top of societal leadership. In the United States, Indigenous people, American Aborigine, are not even allowed the basic right to identity and are labeled as commercial constructs, subjects, property. So the answer to today's topic of steps is the same for the questions which have been asked over by this convening body. The statement is the same. Before we can begin to speak about the process or a process to address these steps for Indigenous people, we must, as World Indigenous Aborigine people, along with the United Nations countries, demand the United States reform policies of misidentification, apartheid, and environmental racism against the Indigenous people of America. NAACP 2015 accomplishments and intent for 2016 through 2017 shall further embrace and assist individuals who are part of reclaiming their tribal cultural identity, implementing sustainable development platforms, while actively assisting members in securing justice and remedy in many areas of their existence, including land claims, custody, and protection of tribal children from covert adoption and placement outside the Indigenous community. Last week, NAACP registered 16 delegates, all of whom stood on this floor awaiting an opportunity to demand justice, and the ears of justice ignored their presence. So today, I, Tushka, standing there, Sheila, speak in their stead. The people who joined me last week but are absent today were bloodline family descendants of first contact American Indian principal leader Massasoit Osamequin. Massasoit Osamequin signed the first treaty with King James, allowing the Europeans access to the lands of America. Today, by order of royal decree from Sagamore William Winds of Thunder Guy, the Treaty of King James and the Massasoit is hereby rescinded. The direct descendants of the first contact Indigenous people in America are not allowed to be recognized as who they are, but instead are forced to accept methods of paper genocide, misclassification, and forced U.S. citizenship assimilated as African American and other false identities. The United States must allow Indigenous right to identity for the American Aborigine. The United States, being primary creator of the United Nations Charter in 1945, must be encouraged by the member nations and supporters of the United Nations to change its racist policies. These policies have continued to violate the rights of millions of ignored and misclassified American Aborigine indigenous people. We are not killed in the woods and forests like the people of West Papua or Brazil. We are killed in the streets in broad daylight, and nothing is done about the killings in the street in broad daylight.
I'm a black Egyptian. My father is much darker than I am. My mother is lighter than I am. In Egypt, people are identified by the religion first, not the race. So in Egypt, if you are Christian, you are a minority person. But if you're black, you're not a minority person. You are a part of the mainstream society. And I came from this background. And in Egypt, you identify as Arab and as Muslim. And in this country, when I first came, I identified myself as Arab American and Muslim first. And gradually, I became to identify myself as black. I came to the US in 1978, and I became a US citizen in 1985. When I became a US resident, I was told by the Immigration and Naturalization that I am white. And I told them that I'm black, and they said, no, in this country, you are white. All Arabs in this country, all Arab immigrants are white. I didn't pay much attention in the beginning to this, because in the Arab world, we identify with our ethnicity first as Arabs, and then with the race second as black or white or whatever. But in this country, you identify with your racial group first and then with your ethnicity second. Gradually, I became black first and Arab second. And I rejected my white classification publicly for the first time in 1987, in February, as a panelist in a function sponsored by the Association of the Study of Black Life and History in Detroit. I said that I belong to two minority groups. I am Arab American and Black American, and I'm racially black and ethnically Egyptian. I was harassed by my employer right after that. I work for a white school district. The superintendent is white. All the associate superintendents are white, even though that we provide services to 30% black population. But the organization is white and the approach is very white. The attitude towards me changed completely after I went out publicly and rejected my white classification. One coworker came to me and told me, a white coworker came to me and told me right after the function that he met with the superintendent, and if I don't keep my mouth shut, my educational career is over. He said, you have nothing to do with these people. You have a history and a culture. These people came from the jungle. You have nothing to do with them. These people lie and steal. When I see one of them in my neighborhood, I call the police. And I was told by the director of general education, who is retired now, in '88, I was told by him that I get people angry when I say that I'm black Egyptian. If I just say that I'm Egyptian, I would get along. I have to add that I was denied promotion twice because I chose black classification. This is part of my 2 lawsuits against my employer, which are currently pending, 2 lawsuits.
Now, just for the education of our viewership, why don't you share with us a breakdown of Egypt as it is today, insofar as blacks or combinations thereof of European descent and what have you?
We don't have Egyptians of European descent in Egypt. We have a population which is basically which is basically a mixture of ancient Egyptian blacks who intermarried with Arabs right after the Arab conquest. The ancient Egyptian population was brown and black before the Arab conquest. But before the Arab conquest came the Greeks. It was the ancient Egyptian population was in Egypt for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptian population was brown and black. And the Greeks came in 300 BC. And they started to intermarry with the local population. And then the Romans came and ruled from 70 BC until they were conquered by the Arabs and kicked out by the Arabs in the 7th century. And these people intermarried with the Egyptian Copts. And they made the pigmentation of the Egyptians, the Copts, much lighter because of this intermarriage with Europeans.
Now, you're an educator, okay? Now, how do you deal with situations when you practice your profession insofar as dealing with the mythology or the misconceptions about Egypt being a white civilization? How do you deal with that?
This is a big problem because Egypt, the ancient Egyptian civilization was a black civilization, and ancient Egyptians were black according to the Greek scholars and the Roman scholars. Ancient Egypt became white only in the 19th century and in the 20th century. And the scholar who is responsible for this is Seligman, the noted anthropologist from England, Seligman. White supremacy argues that blacks are inferior than white intellectually. They are subhuman and they are incapable of building a civilization. White supremacy had one dilemma until Seligman came. The dilemma was ancient Egypt was black according to the Greek and the Roman scholars. 10 of them said that, including Aristotle and Plato. 10 of them said that in writing. They had this dilemma. Ancient Egyptian was black. So if blacks are inferior intellectually and are incapable of building a civilization, how come the ancient Egyptians built a civilization? Seligman found the solution for this dilemma. He came up with a theory called the Hamite theory. He separated the blacks who built a civilization in Egypt and Ethiopia from the rest of the black race, and he called them brown-skinned whites, or the Hamites. So Seligman saved white supremacy from this dilemma, and all the white scholars followed him from that time on. This was at the end of the 19th century. And since that time, white scholarship says that ancient Egypt is white.
This video will prove that America today is in fact Egypt, and just like Egypt too. Now you may be wondering, why do I have a map of Egypt open right here, as you can see? Take a good look at Egypt, today's modern Egypt. What do you see? What is that giant river that flows down Egypt and is said to be the cradle of civilization, what gives Africa and mostly all of Egypt life? The Nile River. And as you can see, it flows all the way down, and you see much of civilization started with this river, as all these cities are all based around the river, including Thebes. But what else do you see? on this river, you see that about 30% of the land is separated to the east and about 60 or 70% to the west of the river. Now, what else do you see on this river? You see a city called Memphis. And if I zoom in a little bit, it's just south of Cairo, Memphis, right here. Where else have I heard that before? Let's keep going. Okay, so if we go here, what is one of the longest rivers in America? Not the longest, but one of them. The Mississippi. Wow, just like the Nile for Egypt. And let's see if I could get a bigger map here. Wow, about 30% of the land is east of this river, and about the rest of the 60 is west. Just like Egypt. 30% over here, 60% over there. It's no different. But wait, you see this long river that gives America much life and substance? Just like the Nile in Egypt? What city do you see on this river that matches this one? Right here. Memphis. Where else have I seen Memphis before? Oh yeah, Memphis, Tennessee, right here. Wow, Memphis right there on the Mississippi River. Just like Memphis, Egypt on the Nile River. Is that a coincidence? No, that cannot be a coincidence.
Or the 25 into the 7 shows you that this is a hoax. The pyramids are a hoax. All right. First off, they're not pyramids, being that they have a flat top. They are oblong cubes. But besides that, they're not thousands of years old. In fact, they're only a couple hundred years old. I'm putting them somewhere in the late to mid 1700s when they were built. The 1888 code gives it away, going in the 25 or the 7, which brings up the 1776 code, going that King George is in fact George Washington. You do know that, right? That then brings in the idea of the hoax revolution, also bringing in the idea of the dollar bill with the unfinished pyramid on the back. So that bringing this in the 1700s. And that's right where I say this is. This would be who built this? This would be built by armies, starting with the French army, when that was taken from the what would be called the Ottoman Empire and or brought into the West. I understand that most people observe or believe it to be a Muslim nation, which it is in fact religiously or you know, culturally, but it has always been a outpost of the West, going back to the idea of the Library of Alexandria, that hidden knowledge, that idea of 1776, which it in itself is a hoax as well. All right? So then look at this. This is all contrived. Look around. You can see that they wrote one layer, they kind of smeared it out, and then they wrote on top of another layer with, it looks like almost the same hand. In fact, a lot of the cursive you can see is the same person writing it. You can see that. So then moving forward, you can go back even to the drawings talking about the battle of the pyramids, or battle at the pyramids, the so-called. Okay, so then the painting of the famous, you know, Battle of the Pyramids should look very similar to what you're used to seeing, right? The Gaza. I'm sorry, the Giza plateau, and that looks nothing like it. That looks somewhere. I don't know where that is. Has nothing to do with Egypt, not as far as I know. So then, how do I know that it's been contrived and it's nothing more than a modern day? And when I mean modern day, a couple hundred years old max. One, going through just the idea that they're always putting it into your modern day mind with the idea of the World War II, the Rommel, the battles in the desert, that then romanticism with the desert, then bringing in that tourism of that century, in fact, which they tried to re-spark, if you recall, in the 70s with the Tutankhamun boy king nonsense going around LA, of many places, the major cities, showing that junk to everyone and getting everyone wanting to go get into pyramid power at the time in the 70s, and, you know, drink your tab and put a pyramid on your head. So you can see that there's the so-called, in quotes, Great Pyramid, nothing more than a construct and an amusement, is in showing in reality not that big of a building. I understand everyone wants to tell you that it's huge and that these guys say, these bricks were so big and these stones. Nonsense. Nonsense. You can actually see that these so-called photos from the 1800s are two photos in one. You can see, just like the Trinity hoax nukes, that those are two photos, one super transposed on top of the other. All right, period. The magical Giza plain is what I call it, because this almost seems to be an artist's rendering of what they want it to look like when it's finished, to me, because it's slightly off from the finished product. All right, there's too much junk. There's not enough junk. There's too much junk and there's not enough junk. It just doesn't match with what they're showing you today as being the modern day plateau. And of course people say, oh, it got buried in no, gibberish. I'm about to show you some of that stuff that supposedly got buried and uncovered, and you tell me if that's thousands of years old. All right. Oh, but before we leave, one of my favorite old photos, always from a long distance, and to show you a different angle, that of course these have been around forever. Just ask the local people, they've always seen them, right? This is yet another composite photo where you can see that the two planes, and I'll be doing a video actually pretty soon in the next week on taking pictures and leveling and that type of thing. Anyways, you can see that this forward picture coming up to the tree line, beyond the tree line, is not level with the image in the background, the so-called pyramids. Also, there appears to be an extra pyramid there. Where to go, You see that one right next to the tree there? Well, because the three others, the little three small ones, should be over here to the far left. See, they screwed this one up. Must have been a composite drawing. Okay, here's all they did, man. You can see this is nothing more than a rock, standard rock outcropping, which is what these pyramids were based on. They were just based on this standard rock. They then just uncovered the rock, you can see that this is a manufactured head they put on there. Manufactured head. They put that on, they uncover this natural rock, and then they show you this. Let me show you what they did. Okay, so take a look at this. This is ridiculous, man. So then they cover up the so-called paws with nothing but artwork. And you're supposed to assume that that's a Sphinx. And they have people like Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock and idiots like Rentz and Art Schmel and George Snorri putting out the story that this is a Sphinx. This is nothing more than a sandstone sculpture, which they created a couple hundred years ago, max. And this is just recent, these paw things. That's very recent. Look at that ridiculousness. This is a sideshow. It's an attraction, and I'm going to even show you more evidence of that. Here they go, moving an entire temple. Now you can tell you can look at that and see that that's not old. You can see that that's newly manufactured junk being put together by the numbers. Can't you? That's not ancient. That's not thousands of years old. That's lucky if it's a couple months old. More great evidence. Oh, luckily the paw that's shown, right, has been honed. And the one that's on the other side, look, even though it's supposed to be exposed, it's not even there, man. It's all made up gibberish. It's all gibberish. Look at the stone, man. You can see it's just sandstone. Alright, moving on to more proofs of this amusement park. Going into the idea of the chevrons, as soon as I saw that, I said that's cathedral work. That's 1800s cathedral work right there. I'll go ahead and put a pillar from an English chapel up, and you'll see that it's the exact same Masonic angles. Same thing. Look at this layout. Just look at it now that you've seen. Just look at the layout. You look at the sandstone Sphinx. You can see that that's just been cut out of the ground because I showed you those earlier pictures, right? Well, none of the stuff was even there. Yet that's above the level, right? And they're supposed to have dug that out, right? Nonsense. And you're supposed to just tell me that all the local people just sat around while over hundreds of years these different people came from around the world to rediscover the pyramids. And in the intermission between those times, the local people just, hid up in the trees. Right? Tricky Dick. Back to the 1888. This is a joke. Look at this. Look, that it's barren wasteland. It's nothing more than an attraction, a roadside attraction. Built 100 years earlier, and these guys were just trying to bring it back into vogue. Strike a pose, man. You can see that that's not ancient. Alright? They took sandstone, they carved it, they made it look like big bricks. They told you it weighed a ton of shit and that nobody could move it, not even with the most advanced technology ever. It's all a song and dance, man. That's all you're ever going to see. Don't tell me, and hey, listen, all of a sudden, just so happens that just down the boat path, I can get you those cruise tickets, a couple $100, no worries. Oh, we have plenty of other little temples, too, that just so happen to be in the perfect little spot for you. And, of course, through time, we had all this manual labor, all these armies. This would be the 11th Australians. all these guys got to, help the locals out and dig out their culture, right? When it's nothing more than they were just digging out the production. This stuff's produced locally and recently. Look at that. It's not thousands of years old. It's gibberish. Alright? Now I'm speaking about the Giza plateau in this video. There are what is called pyramids, which are in fact not pyramids, but they are called that. And they are not these structures. These are carnival attractions. You can see that's cathedral architecture. If there's any pyramids at all, they will be these tiny small ones, and those are dotted throughout Egypt. And they're not nowhere close to what you're looking at with these three Walt Disney productions. And these other ones are crumbling because they're made of sandstone. All right, because the ones inside that have the granite and the hard rock, that doesn't crumble, jokers. So that's been moved in, and it's been honed, and it's been laid by masons. And they sold you a bill of goods for a couple hundred years now. All right, because I'm putting the fact that these things were made somewhere in the 1700s, all right? A couple hundred years old max. Period. All right, they were built to look like this. That's why they look so ridiculous now. All right, enjoy. Have a great time. All right. The pyramids are a hoax, a roadside show, a carnival attraction. Nothing. So with this video, I'd like to go ahead and show you that in this world you're always given the idea of wonder and love, the tunnel of love, the idea of the ticker tapes, right? The flags, the concern, the wanting to know what's in there. All right, you see that there's the rest out there you can still do, but then what's in there, right? So then you look inside there, and then that is where then the eye, the apple of the eye, becomes the deception, the fallen light, right? So what I wanted to do is then look back and look at the idea of the Sphinx, that hoax, joke, over time, and I'm going to use the dates given. This is 1572 right here. And that is how the Sphinx is represented as a head on a platter idea. All right, and then plateaus, and not much else. Right. Later on, you have the same idea, but then with a much in 1591, a lot more so-called little pyramids out there with a few notable ones, and then the Sphinx being nothing more than a head on a platter again. A few years later, things are changing. 1615 rolls around. You want to go ahead and you have a better idea. You decide, okay, we're going to do this motif. Well, hold the phone. Didn't work out well. 1653 rolls around, you have this understanding. Now look very closely at this. Do you understand that that's Abel? That's the head of Abel, the head of the righteous on a platter. Then do you see that Nord, or the north, is actually pointing what you would consider to be south, or flipped on its head, the hanging man, the anguished righteous man? Then that is then the idea of Abel calling out to have his, to be avenged from having Cain whacking him on the head, right? That's the origin. That is then the idea of the good shepherd. So then 1665, you then see that the Sphinx is turned into a woman, but yet still a head and a torso. Noticing, check this out, at the dress of the so-called Egyptians. Nothing like they would have you believe, anyway. Look at this. Now it's becoming the idea of a woman. Isn't that interesting? All right. 1665 again, showing you a different rendition or drawing, shows you the Sphinx as being an idea of the more feminine now headdress, yet still being in this case what looks like the European male face. And also then you have the idea of what looks like the city on the cloud, right? Then of course 1698 rolls around and you want to get back to this kind of motif. I like the let's do they had their own little culture going on type idea, and so then we have that in there. Okay. 1724 rolls around. That's your 77 flipped. You have not only the idea of the Sphinx coming in just as being the head on a pike, but you also have the full winged creature idea. So then those combined, hey, no better idea than to combine them. So then later on, you have 1755 roll around, and you start to then bring in the idea of what you see now as this head in the desert that was buried in time, buried by sand in time, with the other, attractions in the back. And then this is then forward from here, taken out and shown to you as being undug or uncovered. And of course all that is they're just building it, out of the sandstone. They've decided, hey, we can just make this attraction a little bit bigger. All right. Now it's getting, of course, closer, and you can see that they always make up a story about how the nose falls off. The nose falls off because you're trying to mold and shape and hone very soft material. It just gave way and fell off, dude. That's the answer to that question. Yeah, so by 1823, you see that the 14, the double 7, you see that they've gone from the idea of the spiritual into let's putting this into action, having an attraction, changing the design of the head to camouflage the idea that that's the anguished man or the fallen man, the man on the plate, at the mercy of the world. And then the three pyramids, of course, will represent the fallen trinity. You can see what I've done here is I've just aligned up two different angles of the same shot to show you just the depth, that it was just nothing more than dug out of sandstone and created into what appears to your eye as being the shape of a cat. And they just kept adding to it as they uncovered it. That was the construction of it. Do you see what I'm saying? They constructed it as they went. You can see that. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and twist the angle of this camera from some other pictures I found so that you can see it blends perfectly into the background. If you were standing there and you lopped the head off, you wouldn't even notice it. You would say that's just part of the hill. It's very hard to see because it is in fact part of the hill. It always has been, and it's, man, such a trick. So going back to this, you can see that this is a Masonic story, this 36-year Oxford mathematician, but it's interesting that they put it out because they added the fact that he said it was full of junk and that it had stucco. Now stucco again goes back to the 1700s and the 1800s cathedral buildings with the stucco and that idea. And it also shows that it was just not very well thought of. It was more just as an afterthought because it was soot and blackness. Probably they had from somebody burning fires in there. It was just junk. It's not some revered treasure. All right. So this is then what you see if you're a modern day person walking up to the carnival attraction. You're passing the lion, right? The lie is turned on as you go up to the top. As you quite literally have to huff your way up to get lied to. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so you can see I've been showing you that this is the 7 code hoax throughout, but I'd like to show you the biggest hoax of all, and the announcement of the hoax is the Bonaparte hoax. So on the 14th of July, the 777 right there, Bonaparte Bonaparte. All right, left Cairo for the pyramids, which are oblong cubes, being that they're six-sided. You can stand flat on top. Therefore, that is a representation of the cube, or the 68. Anyways, moving forward, he intended to stay 3 to 4 days, which is again your 7. Of course, he could not go because he had to go off to his hoax war. But then, of course, the other reason that he couldn't go inside, and he never went inside, was because they didn't exist yet. They were building them. That's the inside joke. Get it? So that would have been in the 1700s, like I was saying, that this construction would have been happening. All right. So I'd like to move forward and then just show you some more just perspective shots. Show you that even those smaller little kind of stair step things are not that, they're just small little things. They could have also been built by these cats, for all I know. It doesn't matter. They're gibberish as well. Look at this next picture. You're going to see a truck next to them. They're very small. In fact, they may have just been built with side materials. Regardless, these things have never been proven to be anything more than just an eyesore, quite frankly. And in fact, they've never been proven to be anything more than a physical representation, an idea on the flat plane in a third dimension, a way to tell you a story, if you're willing to see it. All right, that's what that's about. Right. So then you can see the perspective here. You can see that truck, and then it looks like I'm not going to say Budweiser, but looks similar to it, like a concessions truck there. It's just nothing more than a carnival. You can see that this is nothing more than built into the sandstone, or the what's known as the native rock. All right. I'm also going to show you a different angle, and then take away the head, and show you that it's just you would be hard pressed to say that you're missing it if it went away. All right, and all I'm going to do is just remove the head part, and you're going to see that it's just nothing more than built into the landscape, giving the human animal, and I'm only saying the human animal because that's how these people act. They act like they're brainless. They act like they have no. You act like you don't have to know what's real. You act as if you get to walk through life and you get to not know what's real, and somebody else is going to do it for you. And this nonsense goes on and on and on. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove the head. Big deal. Alright? I'm just trying not to get overworked here. I'm just saying, man. Do you see how easy this is? So they manipulate, man. They manipulate people into believing these mythological stories. Alright? They give you nothing but despair. Alright? Give you nothing but despair. Alright? Oh, by the way, just so you know, Zahi Hawass, that clown, is Nassar, man. I've told you that before. He's the same character. He played Nassar before he played Zahi Hawass. It's always in the family. It's always kept close. This, again, you can tell is just the manufactured head stuck on top of an outcrop of natural stone, and then they decided, hey, you know what? We can expand this thing in the future. And the problem is they got a little bit too big for their britches, because if you look at what they did with the final product, it's too big. The head the head doesn't fit.
So I found this article while I was on the deep web, just chilling and moving around, and I was not looking for this. I was actually looking for something else, and lo and behold, I ran across an article that states, historians admit to inventing ancient Greeks. What? Nope, I did not stutter. I did not stutter. I did not. Okay, now sit down. Sit down. Those of you that smoke, roll you up something. Those of you that don't, get you some tea. I mean, I'm going to repeat myself. It says historians admit to inventing, meaning they were false, they were bullshit, they did not exist, ancient Greeks. You heard it. You heard it. So I'll read the article. I'm done talking, Jen. Washington, it says. A group of leading historians held a press conference Monday at the National Geographic Society to announce they had entirely fabricated, I repeat, quote unquote, entirely fabricated ancient Greeks. A culture long thought to be the intellectual basis of Western civilization. So what does that say about Western civilization? It was built on a lie. Yes, it says entirely fabricated. I'm so appalled. I'm shocked. Let me just catch my breath. All right, I'll continue. Now, the group acknowledged that the idea of a sophisticated, flourishing society existing in Greece more than 2 millennia ago was a complete fiction created by a team of some 24 historians, anthropologists, and classes who worked nonstop between 1971 and 1974 to forge, quote-unquote, Greek documents and artifacts. Wow. We got a lot of Greek fraternities out here. Quote, honestly, we never meant for things to go this far, end quote, said Professor Gene Hattleberry, who has offered to resign his position as chair of Hellenic Studies at Georgetown University. We were young and trying to advance our careers, so we just started making things up. I mean, hold up, wait, before I continue, I just want to say something. Now, y'all get on me because you don't want to believe some of the stuff that I put out. But they done made up some shit that y'all done made fraternities out of this shit. Y'all got houses. Y'all have whole books on this shit, and it never even existed. I wish one of y'all say something else. Oh, say something else. Say something else. I'm on my page, say something else. Okay, anyhow, I'll continue. It says Homer, Aristotle, Socrates, Hippocrates, and the lever and fulcrum rhetoric, ethics, all the different kinds of columns, everything. All of it was bullshit, they say. Quote, way more stuff than any one civilization could have come up with, obviously, end quote, he added. According to Hattleberry, the idea of inventing a wholly fraudulent ancient culture came about when he and other scholars realized they had no idea what had actually happened in Europe during the 800-year period before the Christian era. Wow. The lies that people tell and others believe, the lies, the audacity. Wow. Frustrated by the gap in the record and finding archaeologists to be, quote unquote, not much help at all, they took the problem to colleagues who were then scrambling to find a way to explain where things such as astronomy, cartography, and democracy had come from. Within hours, the greatest and most influential civilization of all time was born. In hours, they said. In hours. And y'all stomping and dancing and all that. In hours. They made up a whole culture. Hours. I need some of whatever they had that day. Whatever they had, whether it was in a cup, whether it was rolled up, I need that. I need to test that. Because hours, and it's still going on today, hours, wow, okay. Quote, one night someone made a joke about just taking all these ideas, lumping them together, and saying the Greeks had done it all 2,000 years ago, end quote, Hattleberry said. Quote, one thing led to another, and before you know it, we're coming up with everything from the golden ratio to the Naiads, end quote. That was a bitch to write, by the way, he continued, referring to the epic poem believed to have laid the foundation for the Western literary tradition, but it seemed to catch on. Around the same time, a curator at the Smithsonian reportedly asked for Hattleberry's help. The museum had received a sizable donation to create an exhibit on the ancient world, but really didn't have a whole lot to put in there. The historians immediately set to work, hastily falsifying evidence of a civilization that, complete with its own poets and philosophers, gods and heroes, would eventually become the centerpiece of school books, college educations, and the entire field of the humanities. This is some bullshit. I'm just like, I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I'm just a little peeved. I'm just, a little testy, I'm not going to, go outside and, start a war or anything. But I mean, like, this has been a whole civilization. Started off a lie, and it took these people a few hours, my dude, a few hours to come up with something to fool all of you people. And people have been telling others that there was no ancient Greeks, that the non-melanated society had made it up in order to try to make them themselves seem like they were more than what they actually were, when all the stuff really was mirrored off of ancient Kemet and things of that nature. Well, here you go. But I'll go ahead and continue reading the article. It says, Emily Nigel Whiteman, one of the young academics who pulled a month's worth of all-nighters working on the project, explained that the whole of ancient Greek architecture was based on buildings in Washington, D.C., including a bank across the street from the coffee shop where they met to bat around ideas about mythology or whatever. We picked Greece because we figured nobody would ever go there to check it out. Nigel Whiteman said, have you ever seen the place? It's a dump. It's like an abandoned gravel pit infested with cats. She said, inevitably, though, people started looking around for some of this ancient stuff, and next thing I know, I'm stuck in Athens all summer building a goddamn Parthenon just to cover our tracks. Nigel Whiteman acknowledged she was also tasked with altering documents ranging from early Bibles to the writings of Thomas Jefferson to reflect a quote-unquote classical Greek influence, a task that also included the creation from scratch of a language based on modern Greek that could pass as its ancient precursor. They went all out. Historians told reporters that some of the so-called Greek ideas were in fact borrowed from the Romans, stripped to their fundamentals, and then attributed to fictional Greek predecessors, but others they claimed as their own. Quotes, geometry, that was all Kevin, end quote, said Hattleberry, referring to former graduate student Kevin Davenport. Man, that kid was on fire in those days. They teach Davenportation, geometry, in high schools now, though of course they call it Euclidean. Sources confirm that long hours and lack of sleep took their toll on Davenport, and after the lukewarm reception of his work on homoeroticism in Spartan military, he left the group. In a statement expressing their profound apologies for misleading the world on the subject of antiquity for almost 40 years, the historians expressed hope that their work would survive on its own merits. Quote, it would be a shame to see humanity abandon achievements such as heliocentrism and the plays of Achilles just because of their origin, end quote, the statement read in part. Moreover, we have some rather disappointing things to tell you about the pyramids. The works of Leonardo da Vinci, penicillin, the internet, the scientific methods, movies, and dogs. Well, I mean, you heard it. It's all a hoax. It's all bullshit. Unfortunately, this was one of the ones I could not bring over from the internet. This was actually found on The Onion. And it was pretty recent. Let me see. I'm trying to see what I can find so you guys can look it up. But if you go onto the deep web, just look up historians admit to inventing ancient Greeks. So, trying to see who this article was read by. It says by Tabula. Yeah, this is a dark web story. I actually had to copy and pasted it from the dark web and email it to my encrypted email box, and then email it to my regular email box just to actually get this out, because when I had tried to actually email it to myself another way so that I can get the link, it was asking for too much information and I wasn't willing to give that. But yeah, it's wow. Like, I really don't know what else to say. Like, these people, they should be ashamed. They should truly be ashamed of themselves. Trying to see exactly how long ago this story was. It says 10/7/10. Let's see. But it looks like at the bottom it says published 2017. So, yeah. So it seems like it was pretty recent. Like I said, you guys just go on the deep web, see if you can find it. It should be pretty easy to find. Like I said, I wasn't looking for it. I was actually looking for something else on ancient Greek sexuality to find out exactly how they got down back in the day. And I ended up running across this. Lo and behold, I mean, you know, it just landed in my lap. I was not looking to expose these frauds, but here they are exposed.
The biggest fake in history of mankind is the history of mankind, ancient Greece. Bear in mind that history has always been written by the winners. This is what the British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli observed. All great events have been distorted, most of the important causes concealed, and went on to say that if the history of England is ever written by one who has the knowledge and the courage, the world will be astonished. Ancient Greece is supposed to be the birthplace of Western civilization. It is a blend of two distinct periods, mythical and classical. In mythical Greece, the central figures of Greek mythology were the 12 gods that lived on Mount Olympus: Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Ares, Hermes, Hephaestus, Aphrodite, Athena, Apollo, Hestia, Hermetis, and Hades, who lived in the underworld. They seem to be a lot of superhuman perverts led by Zeus, who resembles the Christian image of God. Up to the mid-800s, the Trojan War was just a good story, like Robin Hood and King Arthur. The original account is from the Iliad by Homer. The first name author in history. Even more remarkable was the fact that he wrote it all, on the account of the fact that he was supposed to be blind. Remember now, that is supposed to have happened more than 3,000 years ago. This is the oldest copy of the Iliad, Homer's account of the Trojan War. As you can see, it's old, but it's not that old. It appears in the 15th century and has no provenance, which means nobody knows where it came from. This is how images of Helen of Troy beauty have appeared over the last 150 years. If she existed, who knows what she might have really looked like. Even more unbelievable is the concept of the Greeks bearing a gift of wooden horse, hoping that the Trojans would notice it was a bit heavy or burn it on the spot. As plans go, it was stupid. Trojans were useful to early historians. The English monarchy, the Vikings, the Franks, and even Rome itself were all supposed to have been founded by defeated Trojans. Not bad for a bunch of stupid losers. Following the wooden horse business, the gods seem to desert them, and we have a nice, convenient period which historians call a Dark Age, which lasts about 500 years, and then we are back with classical Greece. We are pretty much dealing with the Athenians here. Naked young men, toga-wearing women, and old beard philosophers who lived around column temples. They seem to sit around all day and work out how civilization should be, the meaning of life, and the best way to live it. They were the first civilization to have democracy, which has worked out in same way in order for them to still have slaves, which enabled them to sit around all day, so no change there. The stars of the show here are Plato, who told us about Atlantis, his teacher Socrates, and whose star pupil was Aristotle, who all taught us to think about civilization. Entertainment was provided by Aesop, who wrote fables which became the script of US TV show, where at the end of the show lessons are learned about the characters in the show or yourself. Again, here's the oldest surviving work of Plato, like Homer's stuff, old, but not that old. Pythagoras and Archimedes were good at sums, even more amazing since they didn't have numbers and writing materials were in short supply. This is Heinrich Schliemann. Unfortunately, he is the father of archaeology. If he's the father, then he was an abusive one. In a good light, he was a ruthless opportunist businessman. In a bad light, he was a compulsive liar and psychopath. As early as 1822, many people have suggested that the present site at Hisarlik in Turkey maybe could be Troy. In 1868, Schliemann jumped in one of the trenches that have been dug by Englishman Frank Calvert over the previous 7 years and announced that the world that he had found was Troy. What in fact Schliemann created was Troyland. The Turkish government must love him. Hisarlik is a United Nations World Heritage Site. Every year thousands of tourists flock to this site. It costs nothing to run. There's no moving parts on a wooden horse. So what Schliemann did for Turkey, he did next for Greece. He helped create Parthenon land. This is Parthenon in Athens. It appears as you will expect it to find it, 3,000 plus years old, looking like an enormous 3D jigsaw puzzle. You imagine that experienced, learned archaeologists brushed and examined every little piece. In this aerial view, we see what is left of the classical complex, and our imagination fill in the blank spots for us. We can imagine Plato and Socrates sitting around debating the meaning of life. You have to bear in mind that the Parthenon doesn't look like it's in ruins because it's just old. We've had battles here. That is why the good-looking statues are in the British Museum, labeled as the Elgin marbles rather than in the walls of the Parthenon. This is what Parthenon looked like in 1805. It doesn't quite have the same look, does it? This image from 1821 shows the Parthenon to be quite a build-up area. As you can see from these images from 1850 and 1862, the tower, which is obviously not classical, however, the brickwork seems to be the same as the foundation walls. Here you can see the beginning of the cleanup process, with masses of rubble being slung over the side. At this point, the tower is still there. So when tourists came to look at the site, they have to use their imagination to recreate the complex. The Greek government got what they wanted, a tourist industry.
Mr. Carson, Mr. Secretary, Dr. Carson. Sir, you have indicated that there will be substantial cuts to the budget that HUD has. Can you give me that dollar amount? I'm showing that it's about $6 billion. Is that correct?
That's about right.
Is that about 13% of the budget?
Yes.
And will these cuts, Mr. Carson, come from public housing, housing vouchers, community development block grants, and other aid to low-income persons?
They come from a variety of sources, including...
How much from public housing, Mr. Carson?
Probably in the neighborhood of, if you combine all the programs, $2 to $3 billion.
$2 to $3 billion. How much from housing vouchers, Mr. Carson?
Rather than go through a quiz on all the numbers...
It's not a quiz, Mr. Carson. I have the time to ask you questions about things that you should have some knowledge of. If you have no knowledge of them, you can simply say so. I'll accept it as an answer. But this is something that's within your bailiwick, my dear sir. How much from housing vouchers?
Again, you know, I can give you that number, but...
Well, if you would give it to me, I would greatly appreciate it, because I'd like to go on to community development block grants.
Well, here's my point. I agree with you that it's difficult to do these things.
That has little to do with my question. You're answering a question that I'm not asking, to be quite candid with you. So would you kindly tell me how much HUD is how much you're going to cut from the HUD budget as it relates to housing vouchers? Now, if you don't know, it's okay to say you don't know, Mr. Carson. I don't hold you to things that you don't know. How much are they going to cut?
Let's just move on and say that I don't want to offer a number because it's subject.
Why would the Secretary of HUD not give the number, the amount that you're cutting from housing vouchers, Mr. Carson?
Because
you're the Secretary of HUD.
Because
you're making the cut.
Because we've already talked about the total amount of the cuts.
Well, the total amount does not help me when it comes to the housing vouchers. I have people who use housing vouchers, and I need to be able to explain to them, Mr. Carson, how much the cut portends for them. How much, Mr. Carson?
Let's hear your number.
Well, Mr. Carson, forgive me for coughing while speaking, but Mr. Carson, you're the witness testifying today. And if you want a moment to ask someone behind you, I would gladly accord you that moment.
I don't want to open the book and look at the numbers.
I see. So you choose not to say how much you're cutting from housing vouchers, or how much you're cutting from community block grants, Mr. Carson.
I want to talk about...
Mr. Carson, you don't get to talk about what you want to today. You get to talk about what I want you to talk about. You get to answer the questions that I pose, Mr. Carson.
Yeah, but I
That's
also get to answer the question the way I want.
Well, you can answer them the way you want, but if you want to show a lack of knowledge, you can do this. It's quite all right, Mr. Carson. So now, how much from community development block grants, Mr. Secretary?
Again, I'm not willing to sit there and
So you don't know how much from community development block grants?
I'm not going to go through the list, this much, and this much. I think that's
I'll move on, Mr. Carson. I accept your lack of knowledge.
This morning, Trump threatened to abandon Puerto Rico recovery efforts. President Trump served notice Thursday that he may pull back federal relief workers from Puerto Rico, effectively threatening to abandon the U.S. territory amid a staggering humanitarian crisis in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. In a trio of tweets, he wrote, "We cannot keep FEMA, the military, and the first responders who have been amazing in Puerto Rico forever." On Thursday, he sought to shame the territory for its own plight. He tweeted, "Electric and all infrastructure was disaster before hurricanes." So you talked about what you, HUD, is doing in cooperation with, I guess, the administration. Do you agree with the president?
I certainly agree that Puerto Rico is a very important territory. The people from Puerto Rico have contributed greatly to the culture of America.
Well, I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is these tweets where the president threatened to abandon Puerto Rico recovery efforts. Do you agree that they should be abandoned, that Puerto Rico should be abandoned?
Well, first of all, as I was saying, Puerto Rico is a very important part of our culture.
No, I know it's important, but I want to know whether or not you agree with the president who's threatening to abandon Puerto Rico recovery efforts.
I think I just said I have no intention of abandoning Puerto Rico. They're a very important part of who we are.
So you don't agree with the president? He tweeted, "Electric and all infrastructure was a disaster before the hurricanes," and sought to shame the territory for its own plight. Do you share that opinion?
I think that our job is to make sure that we take care of the disaster that has occurred.
So you don't agree that it should be abandoned, is that right?
Of course it should not be abandoned.
And you don't think that they should be shamed for its own plight, is that right?
There is no question that there have been a lot of difficulties in Puerto Rico. They ended up
Should they be shamed for its own plight?
In debt. I don't think it is beneficial to go around shaming people in general.
Okay, so I'm glad to hear you don't agree with the president. I have serious concerns about the potential conflicts of interest with regard to HUD funds that are contributing to the profits of multifamily developments owned in part by the president and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Do you think it's appropriate that the president and his family are profiting from federal government funding intended to support low-income families?
If you can give me a specific example, I can address that question.
Well, I want to know if you think it's appropriate that the president and his family are profiting from any federal government funding intended to support low-income families.
I don't think it's appropriate for public officials in general to do that.
Okay. Do you stand by the president's decision not to divest himself of his interest in properties that receive HUD funding?
I think the best thing to do is tell me specifically what you're talking about, and then I can address it.
What have you done to ensure that HUD is properly handling these unprecedented conflicts of interest?
Again, if you can tell me what the specific thing is, I can address it.
These properties that are owned in part by the president or Mr. Kushner are also reportedly in very bad condition. You know Starrett City, don't you?
Yes, I know of it.
For example, which is part owned by the president. You know that, don't you?
I do know that he has
and
a
you know it
small
has received
part
increasingly declining HUD inspection scores. You know that too, don't you?
Do I know what now?
That it has increasingly declining HUD inspection scores.
I know that there are problems there, yes.
But specifically, do you know that Starrett is a problem, that they have received increasingly declining HUD inspection scores? Do you know that?
I know what is necessary to know as the Secretary of HUD regarding that. Do I know all the numbers about Starrett?
No, I don't want you to know all the numbers. All I want you to know is about Starrett. Starrett, everybody kind of knows a lot about Starrett, and it's partially owned by the president. You are the HUD secretary, and you're in a conflict of interest situation. And I just want to make sure you understand what you are overseeing. Do you know that they have declining HUD inspection scores?
I know that they've been having difficulty.
Okay, so you know that they have not passed inspection. What are you doing to ensure that these HUD residents are not suffering as a result of poor management and lack of investment by its profit-motivated owners?
Well, of course, we oversee the PHAs that are involved with that and work with them, as we do with the ones all around the country.
We've learned that the owners of Starrett City, the biggest project-based Section 8 contract in the country, of which Trump is part owner, are planning to sell the property. This sale is already rife with controversy as infighting between the ownership is playing out in public. To date, we have no knowledge of how HUD approves the transfer of Section 8 contracts when a property is not FHA insured or HUD held as Starrett City is, because HUD has not published its process. HUD has the ability here to insist upon things like robust tenant protections and longer affordability requirements, but the process is frankly unknown. Have you gotten involved with this? It's a big issue.
We have a very well-formulated group that deals with these kinds of issues. And they will deal with this one in the same way that they deal with all such issues. There won't be anything that's done differently here than has been done. They have not kept
you appraised of what they're doing?
Excuse me?
Are you satisfied with the progress that they're making?
They will handle this as they have handled all things.
So you don't know. They have not kept you appraised. You don't know whether or not the process is working. So I would like a full accounting of the process that your department is planning to employ, including all decision points and who will make them should this process move forward. And so I want you to commit to that because, again, this is a big project that's owned partially by the President of the United States, and I want to know how this sale is going to work, what kind of protections these tenants are going to have, and you should keep yourself appraised of it because I'm going to want to know, as others will want to know, how it is progressing.
We'll be happy to work with you and your staff to disseminate that information.
There's one thing that stands out in my mind based on the campaign and looking at what happened in the primaries and things that the president said and how he talked to you and others and demeaned you so much. But one of the things that stands out in my mind so vividly is how he mocked and mimicked a disabled journalist. And so you have, let's say, he has openly mocked disabled people, and HUD's most recent budget proposal, which you supported and defended, proposes a steep 18% cut for Section 811 program, which is focused on serving low-income persons with disabilities, as well as harmful rent increases on Section 811 residents. This is very concerning in light of the critical role that HUD plays in providing housing assistance for low-income persons with disabilities, as well as enforcing the Fair Housing Act, which protects persons with disabilities against discrimination in the housing market. Do you remember seeing that display by the president where he mocked and mimicked disabled journalists. Do you remember seeing the site of that?
I remember seeing the episode that you're referring to.
Do you think it was wrong for the president to send that kind of message about what he cares about disabled people?
Well, you know, I'm not really here to talk about the president. I mean, I really want to talk about the people that we're trying to help.
Well, yes, I want to talk about the people too. Right now, I want to talk about the disabled people. And I want to know if his attitude is such that it is reflected in this budget, and you defend the budget, and are you defending in any shape, form, or fashion the fact that the person who wanted to be the president of the United States of America for all people would treat disabled people that way? What do you think about that?
As a pediatric neurosurgeon, you know, a large portion of my patients were disabled people.
All right, so you do care about disabled people, is that right?
Of course.
When you're in front of disabled people who are advocating for resources to help with their lives, and they ask you about the president and the fact that he mocked and mimicked disabled journalists during the campaign, and they ask you, do you defend the president in doing that? What did you say to them?
I would say that I'm going to use the resources and the talents that we have to look out for the interest of the disabled people. We're going to commit to making sure that
So do
they
you
are not
think the cut of $121 million is a demonstration of your support for the disabled? Section 811 housings for persons who are disabled?
I would say it's not the amount of money, it's the result that you get that's
I
important.
beg your pardon, I can't hear you.
I would say it's not the amount of money, but rather the result that you achieve that's important.
Well, you keep talking about the amount of money, but you know, your real concerns and what you care about is reflected in the budget. And it is difficult for me to believe that you really care about the disabled when you are cutting the resources to them because of the difficulty in their lives and the tremendous needs that they have. It is difficult for me to believe you care about them with these kind of cuts. I yield back.
Oh, the deception, the betrayal. Negro, please.
If anyone wants to know, this is what we're about. It's Rise Above movement.
Say the 14 words.
Oh, man.
They would know to join. They would know to join.
I'm a big supporter of the 14, though. I'll say that.
The un-American immigrant that hates America, capitalists, and white people, but lives off us.
Don't push with it! Fuck you, bro! You will not replace us! You will not replace us! You will not replace us! You will not replace us!
southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh. Then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rock, for the tree to drop. Here is a strange and bitter cry.
The migration to where we are now perhaps took thousands of years, I'm not sure, but it took a long time for our people to get here.
Wait a minute, wait a minute. Wait, first of all,
they don't look like Indians to me, and they don't look like Indians to Indians, and a lot of people are laughing at it.
Every time they would make a stop, they would put the sacred pole in the ground. But the next day, as an example, this pole would lean towards the direction that the people are supposed to go. The pole would give them direction, and the people would march again. And people brought everything with them, including the bones of the ancestors. And people brought everything with them, including the bones of the ancestors, including the bones of the ancestors, including the bones of the ancestors. And the feeling, the understanding that I get from that is that they would never return to their place of origin as far as the migration is concerned.
What?
The chapel is dedicated to Santa Maria de los Buenos Aires. Saint Mary of the Good Winds was the patron saint of navigators and a favorite of Columbus. This altar painting dates from shortly after Columbus died and features what's considered the first and most accurate portrait of the great explorer on the left. It's also thought to be the first painting of Indians done in Europe. The Virgin's cape seems to protect everyone under it, even the Indians.
Hello, I'm William Attlee and this is a news brief with truth. See the men on the screen. They are the ancestors of the African American, but there is a problem: their true identity. Thomas McNeely has the story.
Well, William, the African American community is deeply divided due to the tagline, African Americans ain't Africans, which can be found in numerous places on the web. Now, it should be obvious as to why it's causing a commotion, but if it escapes you, let me explain. The current American education states African Americans were brought to America as slaves from Africa, which is simply not true. They are American indigenous, not descendants of Africans. As they say, the truth is stranger than fiction. Although this fact isn't spoken of openly, it's not a secret. However, with programming such as Roots,
That Mandinka face.
Mandinka? What foodstuff's that you talking about? That's African. I ain't no African.
Well, I'm Mandinka. We're proud people.
And I'm American. I was born here. My mammy and my daddy was born here. And my daddy's daddy. And I ain't no African.
12 years a slave, the African American story, and the Book of Negroes. Is it any wonder why so many African Americans are confused? We won't address all the misleading DNA tests being provided to connect African Americans to Africa. So, the argument is, do they continue identifying as African Americans, which is a fake identity for them, or embrace being identified as Indigenous Americans?
Are there any consequences of choosing one identity over the other?
William, that's a good question. According to African Americans Ain't Africans Facebook forum, identifying as African American is to quietly relinquish ancestral connections to America, connections that go back hundreds of thousands of years. A curious story, but one appropriate for February, which is Black History Month in the United States.
What's a conundrum? A story worth keeping an eye on for further developments. Thank you, Thomas. The drawing used in this presentation is from the 16th century book, America, being the latest and most accurate description of the New World by John Ogilvy and Arnoldus Montanus. As you may have guessed, the men in the drawing are American. I'm William Attlee and this has been a news brief with truth.
The idea of Europe bringing civilization to the Americas simply flips truth on its head. This is what European explorers actually found in North America.
Far and away the most beautiful city on Earth. 5 times the size of London or Rome. Great towers and buildings rising from the water. 60,000 gleaming houses, and how spacious and how well built they were. Of beautiful stonework and cedarwood, and the wood of other sweet-scented trees. The many streets and boulevards of the city were so neat and well swept, despite the multitude of inhabitants, crisscrossed with a complex network of canals, like an enormous Venice, but also remarkable floating gardens that reminded of nowhere else on Earth.
While Europe was drinking water from its polluted city rivers, huge aqueducts transported America's water from fresh springs.
But what impressed most were the special merchant areas where timber and tiles and other building materials were bought and sold, as well as greengrocer streets where one could buy every sort of vegetable, fruits, honeys, nut paste and chocolates. Astonished by the personal cleanliness and hygiene of the colorfully dressed populace, and by their extravagant use of soaps, deodorants and breath sweeteners.
Most Europeans never bathed and kept clothes on at all times. The Pilgrim's Notes biographer Zini Feiner had a terrible smell. Indians tried, quote, without success to teach them to bathe. The settlers also had bad breath from rotting teeth. Death and starvation was so common that corpses were just dumped in open pits known as poreholes. Many turned to alcohol and committed suicide. In fact, the story of the first settlers has been deliberately changed, notes author James Lowen, because the truth is so shameful. They actually settled hundreds of miles further south and stayed in America because the mission was a failure. Their real aim, reports historian Robert Beverly, was to find some gold and take it back to Europe.
They spent their days digging random holes in the ground, haplessly looking for gold instead of planting crops. Soon they were starving and digging up putrid Indian corpses to eat. They took some Indian prisoners and forced them to teach the colonists how to farm.
And the meal with the natives wasn't quite the Thanksgiving shown on TV and in school books.
The colonists offered the Indians a toast to eternal friendship, whereupon the chief, his family, advisors, and 200 followers dropped dead of poison.
In mainstream history books, perhaps the most common description of American territory then is virgin land. In fact, notes historian Peter Jennings, it was widowed, horrific enough the Nazi ethnic cleansings in Europe during World War II. Leading American studies professor David Stannard notes it's dwarfed by, quote, far and away the most massive act of genocide in the history of the world. The death of 100 million indigenous people in the, quote, American Holocaust, some from disease, but also vast numbers from a deliberate policy aimed at wiping out the race that mainstream history books continue to pretend never happened.